If you could go back in time and change your life decisions, would you? Well, on one hand, I'm actually quite happy with most of my life decisions that led me into getting to MIT and also led me to starting a successful startup. On the other hand, though, I think I wasted years of my both personal and professional life because of some bad decisions I made in the past. Well, I can't change my past. However, you're watching this video in your present time. And particularly if you're earlier in your life and career, you might be able to learn a thing or two from the mistakes that I made. Well, let's get into it. If you live in any Western country, I'm sure you've heard some variation of the phrase, do what you love or just follow your passion. It's everywhere, from your parents, teachers, random celebrities, social media. Everybody keeps telling you that. And that idea that you should just do whatever you're most passionate about is so deeply ingrained in people's head at this point that in some countries, particularly those with free education, people use this as their sole criterion to choosing what career they want to get into. Looking back, this is actually one of the worst pieces of advice I've ever received. This mindset is a major oversimplification of how to approach your career. In fact, it is contradictory to making sure that you're actually happy in the long run. A career is arguably the thing that you'll be spending most of your life thinking about. After all, you're spending most time with it. And therefore, instead of just blindly chasing whatever you're currently most excited about, you should make sure to carefully optimize every little parameter in a way to maximize your chances of increasing your overall life happiness. And that happiness may look different for everybody. Some people might just be trying to optimize for making the most amount of money throughout their career. Probably not the best mindset. Other people might be looking for maximizing the positive impact they have on humanity as a whole. And yet other people are just trying to maximize the happy moments throughout their lives so their overall happiness increases. I would argue that the last two approaches are probably the best. So you maximize your own happiness, but also the positive impact you have on society. With that, ask yourself, is choosing your career and what you study purely based on what you're currently most passionate about really maximizing your overall life happiness? I would argue that in most cases it's not. You see, back in high school, I was really passionate about two different career options. On one hand, physics. I love physics and I used to prepare for all these physics competitions until I eventually made it to the International Physics Olympiad. On the other hand, I was also passionate about coding and coding competitions. And sadly, around that time, I just didn't have anyone who would help me make that career decision. All I ever heard was, do whatever you're most passionate about. But here's the problem. Even though I was both passionate about physics and coding, I was just slightly more passionate about physics, so I decided to go for physics. I really wish I could go back in time and tell my past self that such a one-dimensional approach to your career decisions is just not the way to go. When you're thinking about your career, you should consider the following three things. First of all, your passions will almost certainly change over time, at least slightly, and therefore you should be like a Swiss knife. You should acquire transferable skills. That is, you should learn skills that you learn in one job, you can easily translate them to another job. For example, let's say you decide to become a physicist working in a lab for particle physics. Now, the skills that you learn in that lab, they're not very transferable. I mean, you might be able to work in another lab on some other experiments with some slight re-education, but you will almost certainly have a more difficult time finding a job. On the other hand, if you decide to become a theoretical physicist working in particle physics, but instead decide to specialize in using, let's say, deep neural networks to run simulations, all of a sudden, your skills will easily translate to virtually anything else. You could work at any top-tier tech company, or you could make a lot of money on Wall Street as a quant trader, or you could do virtually anything else. You won't be struggling to find jobs. Jobs will be struggling to find you. Okay, you can't really tell this, but there's a huge amount of rain behind me, and there's a bunch of kayakers on the Charles River. I bet their canoes are now floated with water. They're gonna sink soon. Well, anyways, the second point you should keep in mind is that not everything will always go 100% the way you imagine. And therefore, you should ask yourself, if your dream career doesn't work out the way you imagined it, are the backup options still something you would be happy with? You see, back in high school, my big dream was becoming a professor at a top-tier university researching theoretical physics. And at least back then, for me personally, that sounded way more exciting than becoming a highly paid engineer or a startup founder. You see, what I didn't realize back then is that if plan A, becoming a university professor, didn't work out, plan B would really suck. It would mean I finish my PhD and I try to become a professor and go from postdoc to postdoc to postdoc until I eventually accept my fate as a failed academic and accept some random engineering job. At least back then, if I had realized that, I would have understood that this plan B really sucks. What I should have understood back then is that trying to become a theoretical physicist really means there's a, let's say, 20% chance that I would succeed at plan A and be really, really happy and satisfied. But more like an 80% chances that my plan A won't work out, and I would have to settle for something that I'm just not nearly as passionate about. And at that time, studying computer engineering would have meant that my plan A of becoming a software engineer may not be just as exciting as becoming a theoretical physics professor, but plans B, C, D, which would be working as a hedge fund quant or doing some other cool job, or maybe even becoming a computer science university professor, are all really good backup options. All of them would mean I make a lot of money and have a pretty good life. And if I had taken the weighted average over all possible career paths of studying computer engineering versus studying physics, I would have realized that computer engineering actually has way better options, with all the backup career plans still being pretty good and making me happy. Thirdly, money matters. I grew up in a household where I was constantly told that money doesn't matter and money doesn't buy you happiness and all that stuff. And obviously, being rich doesn't guarantee you'll be happy. However, if you choose a career path that will almost guarantee that you'll be left struggling with your financials for the rest of your life, that's just not a smart move. And you know who the people are who constantly keep telling everyone that money doesn't make you happier? It's people without money. They're lying to you and to themselves. Numerous studies have shown that, on average, having more money makes you happier. Not happy, but happier. And obviously, at some point, the returns of having even more money start to diminish. That means going from a life where you have enough money, you can afford a house, nice vacations, and don't have to worry about money all the time, going from there to being super rich with private jets and mega yachts. The difference between these two in terms of happiness is not that significant. However, if you're constantly struggling with money, struggling to pay your bills, your mortgages, you can't afford to live in a safe neighborhood, you just constantly have to be stressed about money, that's just gonna make you miserable. It's just so much stress that you have to deal with on a daily basis. And I have experienced this myself. When I used to not have enough money to even know whether or not I would be able to pay my rent at the end of the month, I was not very happy. I was constantly stressed. And nowadays that I'm just more financially comfortable, life is so much easier and happier. For example, last week, I just felt like doing something nice for my parents. After all, they cared and loved me for so many years. And I just decided to book a spontaneous sailing trip in Croatia for them. That's 7 days of pure happiness and joy, and all that thanks to having enough money to afford it. Therefore, look at all your different career options and decide for yourself, is the money that you would expect to make with this kind of career enough to make you happy? To recap, here are the main takeaways. Number one, your passions change over time. Make sure to choose a career path that lets you acquire transferable skills. Number two, make sure to choose a career where if things don't go 100% as you anticipated, your backup options are still solid enough. Number three, money matters. Take it into consideration when choosing your career. The next big realization I made is that intelligence doesn't matter nearly as much as determination and discipline. The reason I know this is because I've gone from being a failing student in middle school to being the best high school graduate in my entire country to doing quite poorly at some rather trivial exams in college, to crushing the most difficult job interviews in the world, to failing at some very simple tasks in my PhD projects, to raising millions of dollars for my startup. My whole career has been this oscillation of being extremely good at some very difficult things to failing at things that shouldn't be that hard. And throughout this entire time, my intelligence, or if you want, my IQ, have been exactly the same. My real problem is that intrinsically, I'm not very disciplined. You know these kids in your maybe high school who always did very well in all exams, even though they were not very ambitious or didn't have any big career goals in mind? Well, I was never one of them. People who are like that, they're very intrinsically disciplined, so they can do really well even if they're not determined to achieve some huge goal or something like that. Well, my brain just doesn't work like that. During my PhD, I didn't have any extremely ambitious goals with huge payoffs in front of me. It was more like, try reading these papers and see if you can come up with something cool. And sometimes I would spend the whole week trying to read a 12-page paper, and in the end I would still have no clue what is actually going on there. Was it because of lack of intelligence? No, not at all. It was just because I had no determination and I just lacked intrinsic discipline. You see, the reason why I did extremely well at the things that I did extremely well at is not because of discipline. I don't think I had much of that. Nor do I think that intelligence plays nearly as much of a role as people often expect. The thing is, I had some extremely ambitious goal in mind. And once you get yourself in that mindset where you make it your life's mission to get that promotion, to get into MIT, to win that competition or achieve that otherwise hugely ambitious goal of yours, you don't need a lot of discipline. You're gonna be so determined that discipline will just naturally follow. Back in high school, I was constantly working on physics problems. And to the outsider, this may have looked like I was a very disciplined student working hard on his problems. But that's not at all the case. I was just obsessed with physics. I was obsessed with winning physics competitions. And physics problems were really all I could think of every single day just because it was an addiction. My big problem though was that I just wasn't aware of this difference between discipline and determination. And when I started my PhD at MIT, I just naturally assumed that I would continue being good as I always was at pretty much everything. And, surprise, surprise, I wasn't. My determination to reach some crazy ambitious goal was gone all of a sudden. After all, I was already at MIT, it doesn't really get better than that, and I didn't want to become a university professor anymore. And just completing my PhD and doing a decent job just isn't really ambitious enough to make me very determined to reach it. And given my lack of determination during my PhD, my lack of discipline really hurt me. And that lack of discipline is something I'm fighting with even today. However, at least I now know that I always need to put myself into very difficult and challenging positions with some huge potential payoff. And that way, I make sure that even when my lack of discipline is hurting me, my determination to reach that very ambitious goal kicks in and compensates for the lack of discipline. The two big takeaways here are, number one, intelligence doesn't matter nearly as much as you might think. What you might perceive as intelligence in other people might just be a sign of great discipline or great determination. Number two, if you're struggling with discipline, as I am, you always need to make sure to put yourself into very challenging situations with extremely high payoffs. If you manage to crack that code in your career, I promise you, the sky is the limit to what you can achieve. The last piece of advice I would give to my younger self is related to romantic relationships. I met my first girlfriend when I was about 16 years old. She was a kind person and our relationship was mostly fine. However, the problem is that fine doesn't equal good. And at the same time, a relationship being fine isn't normally reason enough to break up with someone. We ended up being together for almost 7 years. The problem with that is that 7 years are a huge time investment at that young age, which just doesn't make sense if things aren't going great. Honestly, this was a huge waste of time for both of us. The reason why I didn't break up earlier with her is because I just thought that this was as good as relationships can possibly get at a time. Or maybe I had some intrinsic fear that if I broke up with her, I might not be able to find someone as good again. And all of that despite us clearly being incompatible in so many ways. On top of that, coming from a very Christian household, I had been kind of indoctrinated with this terrible idea that you should stick to one partner and marry young. In hindsight, that was a terrible piece of advice I received back then. If you are a guy either in your late teens or early 20s, this idea that you won't be able to find someone as good is just utter nonsense. Because as a guy, your perceived value increases over time up to a certain age. As long as you make sure you're on track with your career and you take care of your body and work out regularly and stay in shape, you will have an easier time dating at age 30 compared to your late teens or early 20s. And on top of that, as a guy, you don't have a biological clock ticking against you. So especially if you are in your teens or 20s, there's no reason ever to waste excessive time on relationships that don't make sense. If you date multiple partners, preferably not at the same time, you'll learn much more about yourself and the qualities that you're looking for in a partner. And with all of that knowledge, you will be able to make a much more deliberate decision about what qualities you're looking for and choose the right partner who will actually make you happy. I'm sure that 10, 20, 30 years from now, I will look back at this video and I'll have so many more things to add. But hopefully, at least this idea of the mistakes that I have made will help you make better decisions in the future. As I said earlier, choosing careers that let you acquire transferable skills is the way to go. A great place to acquire transferable skills is Brilliant.org, who kindly agreed to sponsor this video. Brilliant is a platform for learning by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons from math, data science, AI, and others. For example, if you're passionate about biology, why not check out their course on computational biology? Over here, you can see a lot of interesting lessons talking about, for example, programming genes. Here you can learn so many new things about how our DNA works and how you can use Python programming, for example, to understand and learn so many things about our genome. And the nice thing is all the quizzes and tasks are interactive, so you can learn by doing. To try everything Brilliant has to offer free of charge for 30 days, just go to brilliant.org/SamuelBosch or click on the link down in the description. You'll also get an extra 20% off their annual premium subscription. I really wish somebody had told me all these things that I said in this video about 15 years ago. But hey, you're watching it in your present time, so hopefully you learned something from it. And if you have some things that you wish you could tell your past self, feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. I would love to hear about it. If you learned something new in this video, you can thank me by hitting the thumbs up, subscribing to my channel, and turning on the notification. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.